Welcome on behalf of WISE San Diego. My name is Hema De Leon. I'm really excited to have you all here tonight. For those that are not familiar with WISE, WISE is the leading voice and resource for women in the business of sports and events. We've been around in San Diego for a little over 5-6 years or so. We're a national organization and we have chapters across the country. So our purpose is to put on events like this, especially during this time, virtually, to help us all get together, work on some professional development topics, discuss what's relevant, just kind of find a good networking group. So we're really excited for you all to be here. Logistically, I think everyone's so super familiar with Zoom now, but please make sure you're muted. Make sure you reach out to us via the chat function if you have any questions. We will hold a Q&A section at the end. So if you do have questions for Shaka or us at WISE, please hold those for a moderated Q&A session at the end, but feel free to use the chat function to get those started. So with that, I will pass it along to Elisa, who is our Director of Mentorship, and she will be introducing our guest speaker tonight. So Elisa.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I am very honored to introduce Shaka Johnson, who is our very special guest speaker with us tonight. Shaka currently leads the legal department at Sony Electronics as Vice President and Associate General Counsel. As the head of the department, Shaka and his team are responsible for all traditional legal affairs for the business in North America. Shaka was previously with Sony Electronics from 2011 to 2015 and led a variety of corporate sales, post-sales, and e-commerce related matters. Immediately prior to his current role at Sony, Shaka spent 3 years as an associate general counsel leading the global sales and marketing legal team for Facebook's AR/VR group, including Oculus VR, covering retail and e-commerce, marketing, enterprise, and other consumer-facing matters. Prior to his first stint at Sony in 2011, Shaka spent time at Sanyo, North America Corporation, Gateway Incorporated, Higgs, Fletcher, and Mac. In 2014, Shaka was named one of the Association of Corporate General Counsel's top 10 30-somethings. He currently serves as a member of the Association of Corporate Counsel San Diego Board, as well as the USD Law School Board of Visitors. He previously served on the USD Law Alumni Board's Diversity and Inclusion Committee and the Jackie Robinson's YMCA Board for 10 years. Actively participating in the group that spearheaded the San Diego County Bar ACC Diversity Fellowship Program in 2009, and earlier chaired the Sony Electronics Pro Bono Committee for 2.5 years. Shaka loves playing and talking sports, but family is obviously his main hobby. Shaka has been married to Candace, his wife, since 2011, and has 2 beautiful daughters, Jayla, 6, and Maya, 4. Shaka?
Thank you, Alyssa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It is really awkward to hear that much about yourself. But all I can do is grin in embarrassment. I appreciate Hema for the introduction and not throwing me under the bus. The Zoom technical difficulties were all on my own. So I apologize for that, everyone. I was having troubles getting in, but I am on a backup computer and hopefully everything works out. Is the presentation up?
Caroline will share it.
Oh, okay.
There we go. It's up now.
Thank you. Only because I have a really important next slide to the beginning, which is the beginning of my talk. And that's simply the same way I'm going to, which is technically the second slide. But I'm going to start the same way I'm going to finish, and that's with a thank you. Thank you to the board and the good folks who asked me to participate and join and talk to you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Hopefully I have something that has a positive impact on and for you all. But thank you also selfishly, the chance to talk and come speak with you made me kind of do a lot of self-reflection for myself, for my team, and the environment around me, to think about emotional intelligence, to think about how I am living it, embodying it, and incorporating it. And so it's given me a good opportunity to be deliberate about my own emotional intelligence. So thank you. The next slide. All that said, I am not an expert. I am not a psychologist. I am not certified. I'm not a doctor. I am not here to tell you about the science related to emotional intelligence, or to explain to you how to scientifically or psychologically break it down. That is not what I do. I didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn last night. I know everyone's on mute, but I'm sure you're all laughing hysterically at that. What I am is somebody who's embodied what is known as emotional intelligence, who's valued it my entire life and career, and found it as an absolutely critically important um, asset to move through my life. So I'll talk about a little bit more on that in a minute, but I will introduce myself just a tad more than Alyssa already did. I won't go into everything quite as much detail because she did such a great job of doing that already. But I'm a San Diego native, born and raised. I went to Grossmont High School, um, grew up here, played sports, talked sports. You know, my first 3 years of practice, I had an online sports talk show. Back then, it was just called an online sports talk show. Podcasts wasn't a word yet. Um, but if it was today, I would have called it a podcast where I just talked about sports. If they keep score, I like it. The sport I played most and ended up somehow being best at was basketball. Um, I played basketball at Grossmont High School. We won CIF in 19 did some time ago, and went to Sonoma State. Played basketball there. Redshirted. Played 4 years there. Was a captain and learned a lot of life lessons while I was there. Left immediately. Went to USD Law School. Graduated in 2003, and as pictured there, my wife and my two kids, two daughters, who are the loves and joys of my life. In my career, I started off at a law firm. I was there for 3 years. An opportunity came to go in-house at Gateway. I took that opportunity. I was there for 3 years. I went to Sanyo, didn't quite get to the 3-year anniversary, left there 2.5 years to join Sony, where I was for 4.5 years. Then I did join Oculus and Facebook AR VR, was there for, you guessed it, 3 years, and have been back now in my role since 2018. My perspectives on emotional intelligence, what is known as emotional intelligence, is something that has been sort of a compass for me throughout my career. It's a term of art we're all familiar with now, but back then, in the early 2000s and the late 90s, it wasn't a term of art, but it was something that I tried to live by. I've always valued EQ, even when I didn't know what it was. An example is something I used to tell myself, or anybody who's willing to listen. One day, if people are in a room trying to decide who stays and who goes, if somebody's going to lose their job or get laid off, I will not be in that room with them as my fate is being decided. And I said, I want to build up relationships and be somebody that people want to keep around, that people want to be around, that they want to work with, that they want to communicate with when that day comes, because I don't know when or how that day comes. And so that was, it's a form of, long-term emotional intelligence in the moment. Since that time, I've become a much more positive-minded person and have viewed that more in promotion sense and opportunity sense, rather than what happens if somebody wants to let me go. But, all the same. So what is emotional intelligence? It's your ability to recognize and understand the emotions inside of yourself and others, and your ability to use that awareness to manage your behavior and your relationships. Emotional quotient, EQ, what we know, is really just the measurement of emotional intelligence. Effectively, it's you have intellectual intelligence, IQ, emotional intelligence, EQ. I prefer use when I say EQ rather than EI, frankly, because EQ just sounds better. But ultimately, so when I say EQ, I'm saying emotional intelligence. It's not me forgetting what the abbreviation of emotional intelligence is. There's 5 key components of EQ: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, internal or intrinsic, empathy, and social skills. Before we start to unpack each of those in more detail, I wanted to take some time to talk about some sort of minimum requirements of success. If you can go to the next slide. It's what I call, excuse me, table stakes, the minimum requirements, right? The things that you have to do to be successful. Work hard, be intelligent, have the expertise or the appropriate know-how for your job. For those that play sports, we call this just plain talent. You have to be able to run fast for in some sports. But every relatively successful person has table stakes, has the skills that I am calling table stakes. Oftentimes, people sort of say, or they say to me, I focus too much on EQ or too much on the qualities of EQ and not enough on the expertise. And that's a lot of times because I view things like expertise. I'm a lawyer. I need to know the law. I need to understand it. I need to analyze it. I need to be smart and strategic. I view those as table stakes that whether I'm deliberate or not, if I'm not good at that, I can't have my job. But the EQ is something that I can work on. And it's really something that I think can differentiate myself, and others can use to differentiate themselves. So if you go to the next slide, both are needed. You need to be smart and expert, IQ. You need EQ. If you really want to optimize your success, you need to embody both. You can hang in there and do okay with one with IQ. It's really hard to not know how to do your job and keep your job even if you have good EQ. But it's really hard to optimize your success without both. So this is an opportunity to talk about a subject, emotional intelligence, that I'm really deliberate about, and I probably skew really heavily on focusing on, talking about, or thinking about for myself and my team, because I consider the expertise the table stakes. So think for you, if you will, I'm a really visual person. I think about things in pictures and images in my mind. And I start by often, for better or worse, often illustrate my thoughts through story and visualizations rather than just saying them. So as context, I'm going to run you all through that exercise, whether you like it or not, with a visualization. So picture for me, if you will, the most successful person you know, regardless of industry. Now, I try to know my audience and I understand what WISE, the organization, stands for and is. And so I'll make it a little easier. Picture for me, if you will, the most successful athlete you know. Somebody who has been, the best, athlete you played with, watched, talked about, etc. For me, when I think of that, immediately Michael Jordan comes to mind. There's a lot of great athletes, but I think about Michael Jordan. He obviously was very good at what he does, or what he did since he's retired. Fast, jumped high, ran hard, worked hard. But there was something different, right? There's other people who can shoot. There's other people who can run and jump. There's other people who can do some of the physical things, embody the physical talents that Michael Jordan had, but there was something that distinguished him. In basketball and in sports, a lot of times it's that mental edge, it's the mental game. And in the corporate world, I view, and in the business world, and for the other 99% of us in society, I view that as the EQ, the emotional intelligence, the thing that separates us and distinguishes us. It's how we stand out positively from the crowd and those around us when we talk about EQ. So now that we've gotten here, and I've kind of given you the illustration that I thought of and talked about the importance of standing out. Let's actually unpack what emotional intelligence is. So self-awareness, right? The ability to recognize and understand your moods, your emotions, and drives, as well as what effect they can have on others. Um, this hallmarks confidence, realistic self-assessment, sometimes self-deprecating humor um, are the things you might see with people who embody this. Um, Self-regulation is the ability to control or redirect your disruptive impulses, right? To control the way you behave, your self-regulation. This, its hallmarks can show up through trustworthiness, integrity, comfort with ambiguity, and openness to change. Motivation pretty much speaks for itself, but a passion to work for reasons that go beyond money and status, the things that drive you to be good, to do good, and to achieve. Empathy, the ability to understand emotional makeup of other people, the ability to genuinely consider and think about how the person or the people across from you or around you are absorbing and receiving things that are happening or things you're saying. Finally, social skills, your proficiency in managing relationships and building networks, and your ability to find common ground. You can lead change, can be more persuasive, and build and lead teams with good social skills. If you go to the next slide, more practically and shorthand, EQ, know yourself, know your audience, be able to flex, be able to ask yourself, how will my actions and words impact or be received? Is there a way to do what I want to do in a way that works for us both? You can ask yourself stuff like that. How can or could I behave to optimize the outcome? A lot of times you'll hear people say, yeah, but that's not my fault and I can't control how that person receives it. No, that might not be true, but you can control the way you deliver. You can control the things that you do. That's where the self-regulation comes in. The actions, what we do and how we behave, we can control, right? And using a sport metaphor that's starting to get overused, control your controllables. And then finally, similar to the fourth bullet point, what can I do for you? Thinking about others, focusing on others, as whether it's someone you lead, somebody you work with, or somebody that works for you or around you. What can I do for you? Not EQ. I do what I want, period, right? I don't care if people like me. That's their problem. I keep it real, right? I tell it how it is. I'm a straight shooter. And if you don't like it, that's your problem. My performance and work speak for itself, right? A lot of these things, the first three, we all know. In fact, we might have said these things to ourselves or to others at times in conversations. I know I have at different points. But it's not very EQ to ignore the fact that our actions, our words, and the things that we do impact those around us. And if you ignore that, then you are not going to be able to flex when the environment changes. You won't be able to change your behavior. You won't be able to flex to the environment around you and optimize your behavior for the circumstances. My performance or work alone speaks for itself. Some of us are in jobs that are so obvious that if we do our job well, there is no disputing it, right? Doesn't matter how much or little EQ we have. In my opinion, there aren't a lot of those jobs out there, right? The majority of us are in jobs that are run on a long continuum, right? They're very gray. There's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of subjectivity. Certainly as a lawyer, I deliver legal advice. I can know the law, deliver legal advice, and more often than not, my legal advice isn't going to be called to task, right? Like you don't get sued for everything. And even when you do, you don't go to trial for everything. So it's really important for those of us that live in more of the gray, that we have other things that can distinguish ourselves besides just our good work. Again, using a sports metaphor, I'm going to beat this dead horse, by the way. Using a sports metaphor, coaches, right? There's lots of coaches who win and win and win and they keep their job. And the moment they don't, they lose their job, right? And a lot of times in those situations, most times in those situations, it's somebody who hasn't built up a very positive environment around them, or perhaps their EQ wasn't as high as maybe it should have been. So when the opportunity to move on presents itself, the organizations do, because the winning stopped. Just as an example. Finally, sort of the opposite of what can I do for you? What can you do for me? Right? Asking that, if you're asking that question, obviously maybe not directly, but if you're asking that question and you're behaving because you're trying to figure out what somebody can solely do for you, it's going to show in your actions, and it will result in a very non-EQ manner. Next slide, please. So why is developing EQ important in the workplace? I would hope that by the time we got to this slide, the metaphors, examples, and stories I've given make the answer obvious, but job satisfaction and job performance. I think job satisfaction, I don't spend a lot of time or any time after this slide talking about how it impacts your job satisfaction, because frankly, strong EQ will result in positive environment around you, mentally and literally, and having a positive environment around you will enhance your satisfaction with the environment you're in. So there's the job satisfaction. Job performance, it enhances because of a number of the things I just talked about. But if you go to the next slide, this is one of the few places where I do actually pull out some data that I found and read about. The emotional stability, having emotional intelligence or strong emotional intelligence can impact your job performance in a number of ways. And there have been studies, and these, I think there's 7 of these specific areas have shown up as being stronger when you can perform with emotional intelligence. Like I started saying, emotional stability, your greater ability to manage your emotions and tolerate stress around you. Conscientiousness, good impulse control. People who perform well have this. Extroversion, not a requirement. You don't have to be the life of the party, but a willingness to establish relationships, right? If you're so shy that you're unwilling to talk to people, it's going to be difficult to express and embody the strongest of EQ. You can still have it, but it's certainly more challenging. And those that have high job performance tend to have a willingness to be open with relationships. Emotional intelligence, basically the ability to perform emotional related behaviors, express your emotion, empathize, and frankly live by those 5 factors. Cognitive ability, you got to have some intelligence. You can't be a dummy. You got to have your expertise. And studies suggest that having strong emotional intelligence actually overlaps, right? Those who want to solve the emotional intelligence problem also are those smart enough to enhance their literal and intellectual IQ. Self-efficacy, confidence in your ability to cope with demands, obviously is reflected in people with high job performance. And finally, surprise, those who perceive their performance well are often those who are performing well. If you perform well, a lot of times they perceive their performance as strong. I use the words, if I can see it, I can be it. And it's one of the factors they have there. Ultimately, those who have high EQ want to succeed. And so they're typically the ones, the higher your EQ, the stronger you are at finding and figuring out the ways to succeed. If you can go to the next slide, please. A few examples just to think about of high and low EQ. I will take a pause for a second. If you hear a screaming 6 or 4-year-old in the background, I apologize. It is the life of living remote. I have enough sound barriers between me, but I know I can hear a little bit of it. So if you hear it, we'll all just roll with it. So let's take a few examples. An upset employee finds a compassionate ear. Yes, we all get moody sometimes. It says even at work. I would say especially at work, especially when you work remote. with everyone. But how a person deals with coworkers or employees having a bad day is a good indication of EQ level. It's something that these are examples that help you not only check for yourself, but check in others to understand the environment you're in. Somebody who doesn't notice moodiness, ignores employees, exacerbate the bad mood, kind of challenge and light the fire even further, throw gasoline on the fire. Telling somebody snap out of it, get your stuff together. Maybe that's not the highest of IQ. On the other hand, if it's somebody who can take a pause, one thing that I've done or try to do is say, hey, wait a second, before we move on, how are you? Right? I'm getting a sense that something else is going on, and to me, it's more important that we talk about that right now than this project, which we can talk about tomorrow or in 15 minutes. And taking an opportunity to step back and connect personally and understand how somebody's feeling or what they're maybe going through is not only a sign but an expression of good, strong EQ. Another is when people express themselves openly. Somebody comfortable speaking up about things that are important, just as they're comfortable listening to other people and their opinions, is showing high EQ, right? Somebody adept at doing this is expressing high EQ and focusing about how much they care on others and their emotions. For me, the way I embody it is I try to build openness. It's not always the easiest to get people to open up to you. There's a lot of trust that you have to build for people to do that. But the more you can do that, not just for yourselves, not just for the smaller circles, but even the larger circles you work in and live in, the stronger you can create the EQ, the collective EQ of your teams, of your communities, and the people you're around. If you can, we can actually probably skip the next one. It's just another example. And just go to the next slide. So how EQ can impact your communications? Obviously a lack of, maybe not obviously, but a lack of EQ can negatively impact in a number of ways, right? Less understanding of your own emotions, less understanding of others' emotions, less effective communicating and dealing with the emotions around you, and inappropriate communication that can lead to outbursts or failing to communicate important information. Ultimately, I conclude these bullets as this is simply, the failure to know yourself and to know your audience can, will find you potentially in a place that you don't want to be. A leader, a person who embodies and practices high EQ will be able to more effectively communicate their vision and their ideas, improve their influence, persuasion, their inspiration, inspiring of others, ensure appropriate responses to stressful situations, and manage their own emotions. This one is one that I look at and reflect on stuff that I want to achieve. And by no means am I perfect. That was supposed to be part of my intro as to why I'm not an expert and half convincing you not to listen to me. But I am not perfect. I recognize that. Anybody who tells you they are, don't believe them. These are things that I'm constantly striving to figure out how to do better. And one of the things that I think in and of itself is an expression of high EQ is wanting to focus on these things, wanting to figure out how to do these things better. So as you see these bullets and some of the other bullets, which seem straightforward, like, yeah, of course I want to be more persuasive. Of course I want my team to manage their stress better. Of course I want to manage my own stress better. But as you look at these and you truly want to do those things, to think about what can you do? Frankly, what can I do when I think about it as myself to do these better for myself, for my team, and those around me? Next slide, please. So here are some tips that I sort of assumed the presentation was going to be shared. So I won't read these bullet by bullet, but some tips as to how to be more self-aware. Pay attention, right? Like try to self-check yourself every once in a while, right? See how did that make me feel? Why do I feel frustrated after that call or interacting with that person? Be self-aware, be deliberate, take feedback. Self-regulation, find techniques that help you deal with stress, whether it's hobbies. Meditation is a big one that I've gotten into the last few years. Things that give you an opportunity to clear your head, to center yourself and think through what you're doing, what you're saying, and what's actually happening around you. I don't know about you, but I am somebody who falls victim to a lot of self-speak. I talk to myself a lot, not always, and you'll find self-speak, depending on personalities, isn't always the most healthy behavior. Because a lot of times what I'm trying to do is convince myself what's wrong with an idea or a plan, and it causes me to overthink. And what I do is I'm much better when I can clear my head, when I can clear my thoughts, by finding ways to regulate my mind and my body, to think about big decisions and what's going on around me, so that I can avoid the self-speak getting the better of me. Empathetic, try to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. If you said what you said to that person and you heard it, how would you feel? And don't stop at, well, I'd be fine because, right? Think about how it can land. Where's the person? What are they doing? Right? There's saying that I'm sure many of you have heard. Everybody's going through something you know nothing about. So think about how what we say and how our behavior can impact others, and be empathetic to the circumstances they might be in. Motivation, find things that motivate you besides money. One of the exercise I have here, try a love it or loathe it exercise. It's something I did, I've done a couple of times, where for a week I get a piece of paper and I have two columns. On one side I have love as a header, on the other side I have loathe. And literally every time I do something, if it felt good, I'll write it in the love column. If it didn't, I write it in the loathe column. And what it does is it helps you more specifically identify what you actually like about your job or the environment you're in, as opposed to when somebody says, so why do you like your job? Oh, it's great. There's so much work and it's so great, right? And you're really vague, but you really didn't pinpoint exactly what are those things that are motivating you. You also, what don't you like about your job? It's stressful and I'm overworked. Well, what about that, right? Because we've all been in situations where we feel overworked, but we're motivated, right? We enjoy it. We don't mind it. For those of you, I know, for this organization, there's a number of people who've played or participated in sports, and we know the commitment level that takes. And we gladly did it when we did. We gladly do it now, and we understand that people and why they do it, because they're motivated, even though it's hard. So finding and being deliberate specifically about what you love and you loathe can help you think about where to concentrate your focus and where you need to be even more conscious of what you're doing. If you're in the midst of doing something you don't like doing, be really self-regulatory and aware, because those are the times that you might fall out of EQ. Finally, social skills, listen actively and attentively, managers, peers, everyone. You should try to, not just try, you should listen to people regardless of whether they're your manager, a subordinate, a peer, or none of the above, right? We're all human, we're all important, and we all deserve to be heard. Sometimes that takes a little more energy, but I find it is worth the extra energy. Next slide, please. I would be, as I mentioned at the beginning, I am a very relationship-based person. A lot of EQ is based on relationships. I could have ended, discussion about EQ in the last slide, but I think there's a couple of points that I wanted to make. One is relationships, and if you can go to the next slide, you can use emotional intelligence to really build good relationships. And to me, it's pretty core to, again, performance, satisfaction, happiness around you. If you're in relation, think about a conversation with somebody you don't like or who you fear doesn't like you and how that feels, right? And then think about somebody who you do enjoy being around. Regardless of the topic, the conversation's easier and it's more enjoyable. Or it's much more difficult and less enjoyable, and you can't wait to get off the phone, the Zoom, or out of the meeting. So manage relationships. When you care, show it. Ask for feedback. Listen to feedback. Take feedback. If somebody gives you feedback and you either push it back, you defend against it, or you say that's great, you just throw it in the proverbial bin. It reflects, right? It doesn't build trust. You want to build trust and acknowledge the other person's feelings and situations. There's obviously a number of bullet points here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are just different tips and strategies to really cultivate, to build, cultivate, and maintain good relationships. The next slide, please. Networking. This is a big one that comes up every time, you know, we joined. I was fortunate enough to join you at the speed mentoring event back in February, shortly before we all got chained to our homes. It was a great time, and the networking was a big piece of the conversation. So I thought it made sense to also think about EQ in the context of networking. When you're out networking, whether it's in a Zoom call or hopefully one day when we're actually in a room together again, take it as an opportunity to make new and interesting relationships, whether you call them friends, contacts, creating unofficial or official mentors, those that can impart wisdom and support you in your journey. Look at it that way. That's your opportunity to do that. New relationships can aid in your effort for constant learning. You should always want to be learning. It's a very a characteristic or common trait to exhibit and embody strong EQ is to want to be learning, and new relationships can help you do that. Create meaningful, actual connections, right? Don't try to create networks that are simply to have more connections, right? I'm moving over to the other column now. Don't expand your network simply with the end goal of having a big network. It's not really that valuable. I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but I'm sure we all have a bunch of people on LinkedIn where if they reached out to you, you'd have to go see, am I linked in with this person already? I didn't even, you don't really know who they are. And I can guarantee you that simply being connected on LinkedIn, as an example, is not going to get you a recommendation when you would like a recommendation, right? My example earlier, which I'll use the promotion example now, somebody simply knowing your name or being connected or having had your business card at some point is not going to lend them to want to recommend you for a job, to stick their neck out, whether it's for promotion or to avoid, as I mentioned very ominously earlier, the circumstances where somebody has to go or, to get the big project. They do that for people they know. People stick their neck out for people they have a relationship with, or people they trust. So don't use it as an end goal of simply expanding a network so that you can say you're connected. You need to actually be connected and build a relationship. Don't just view it as an opportunity to get the next thing that might be coming to you. And again, very similar to one of the comments earlier, don't just ask what the person can do for you in your mind or quite literally directly. I have met people at different networking events that are clearly not as, students and whatnot, usually students, who aren't as good at networking, and oftentimes they make really obvious their intentions and may not say or even say directly, where do you work, what do you do? Oh, and they kind of start looking around the room, right? Because they may not want to work where you work, or they may not see an obvious path to you being able to help them. That is not the way you build good relationships, and it's really bad practice if you only do that once you've identified somebody who can help you. This book here is one that I don't believe, I didn't go back and read it. I've been reading this book at least once a year for the last 2020, last 3 or 4 years. I think 3 years. And I hand it out to anyone who will take it from me, and I recommend it to anyone who will listen to me. It is in my opinion, I don't know if it uses the term emotional intelligence or says this book is about emotional intelligence, but the book really is about embodying the characteristics of appreciating those around you, the way you yourself can impact the environment, and the way things you say and do are received by others, not just at work, but at home and in your communities. So it's a recommendation, like I said, anytime somebody gives me an opportunity to recommend it, I do, and this is an opportunity, so I am. It's not a long book, but I recommend it. So as promised, beginning and ending the same way. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you. Thank you for listening to me talk as long as I did. I do have the gift of gab or the curse of conversation, depending on who you are. I just appreciate getting a chance to talk to everyone and get to give my thoughts on this, on something that I really value and see as really important.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Shaka. That was a great topic. I know a lot of us in this Zoom chat find this a very important topic. I know, especially more than ever now, with us being far away and managing relationships from a distance. So thank you again to Shaka and everyone who joined us. If you don't know me, my name's Lindsay Ball, and I've sat on the WISE board for about 5 years now, which is crazy. But I do want to open it up now for this time. If anyone has questions, I know a few questions came through that I'd love to toss it over to you all and use this next 11 minutes or so to throw anything at Shaka.
Almost anything.
Almost anything. How about Megan? Let's start with Megan. I think she had a great question.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I was wondering how you recommend dealing with someone who may have low EQ at work, especially if they might be in a leadership position. I know it's sometimes tough and, at times frustrating as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a huge challenge. Again, I will preface this with, I am not perfect. And it's a challenge that I myself ask the same question a lot if I run into that. One of the problems with somebody with low EQ is they don't accept feedback that well. So you've got to find ways to materialize or get the feedback to them without damaging maybe the relationship. If it's somebody, especially if it's somebody that maybe you report to, you said in leadership, find somebody they trust, find ways to have a conversation, try and build trust with the person or somebody in their inner circle to deliver the feedback. Try to be open, try to maybe reflect upon yourself. One thing that I do when I try to deliver feedback is I do things probably similar to the way I'm talking now, which is, I'm not perfect. Here's what's wrong with me, right? And engage and open for a conversation that makes it realistic and less threatening and less defensive. One of a really interesting thing is when somebody's not defensive and they feel comfortable, they talk much more freely. And once they become defensive, once they feel like they're being accused, right? You can't go to them and say, you have low EQ. You do a terrible job building relationships and you don't take feedback. That conversation is not going to end well. But what might happen, right, depending on what it is that they're doing that creates the low EQ. I'm using feedback as an example, but let's say they don't take other people's feelings into mind, is maybe have a conversation that says, hey, if it's you in particular, or if it's somebody else, create a hypothetical that removes them from the situation and maybe either puts you in the situation or a fictitious person or scenario, and say, hey, I've got this friend, right, who's been dealing with a situation not different than a situation that I have here at work. They're going through a lot, and the person they're dealing with doesn't really care how they feel, right? And see where it goes, and kind of open up. I'm not going to play out the entire conversation, otherwise we'll be here all day. But see how it goes. Be open to that. One of the realities is not everybody has strong EQ. Not everybody who gets to a position of leadership is going to take or respond to that conversation well. And so then you get back to controlling your controllables, which is your own EQ, impacting positively the people around you, and continuing to do the best you can at that. The question you ask is one of the hardest nuts to crack, falling off the tree. And so one of the things that I do a lot of times is I just try to think, what can I do to make the situation better? And hopefully, what can I do to bring that person along? Whether I'm leading them or not, or whether they're leading me. How can I express myself in a way that maybe they'll accept without, sort of in an indirect feedback? it's a really challenging one. Leadership and Self-Deception is a great book. You should read it.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
And the Arbiter Institute who wrote that book, they are not paying me, I promise you.
Endorsement. Awesome. Yeah, that was great. Hema, I think you had a great question as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that response, because I actually had the same question as Megan. So I think that, taking responsibility for what you could control is super helpful advice. So I'm pivoting and changing my question. So I don't know if you have any tips or ways that you can display to prospective employer that you have a high EQ. I mean, are there ways to put it on your resume? Are there ways to include it on LinkedIn? Are there ways that you can sort of sell yourself as someone that is, intelligent in EQ without sort of saying the obvious, right? Like, we're all in a place where we're trying to, at some point in time, like you said, get the promotion or get a new job or put yourself out there and sell yourself. And I'm just curious if you have any advice as to how to display that in your professional network or on your resume.
Yeah, so I hadn't actually ever thought about that specific of a question, but I think of EQ in this circumstance like I think of trust, right? And, I can tell you, trust me, right? I can tell you I have high EQ. The reality is you don't believe it, you won't trust me genuinely until I've probably built and justified your trust in me. And I think EQ is really similar, and this is why relationship building, maintaining, cultivating is so important. Is it's really difficult to express EQ without having an opportunity to display it and have the relationships. And so that's where, I always think about, I think about things like I like to play golf, right? And, but in my house and my family, I have kids and my wife, who is fantastic at dealing with the kids, doesn't like me spending 6 hours on a weekend out hitting a golf ball around. And so I'm constantly building goodwill, trying to at least, because I don't know when I'm going to need it. Right. So that one day I can say, I'd like to go golfing tomorrow, right? Or next weekend. I view jobs in our work environments the same way. We should always be building goodwill chips. Good relationships are kind of like goodwill chips that we're putting in the bank. I don't know when I'm going to cash them in. I don't know what I'm going to cash them in for. I don't know if it's going to be to protect my job, get a promotion, or get a different job or something like that. But it's better to have a lot of goodwill chips than not. And believe you me, when you need the goodwill chips, it's too late to go get them. They have to already be there. So I know I answered the question and I went off on a tangent, but it's my way of saying, do the work with the relationships, build the network, so that on LinkedIn, in these other circumstances, they're going to see, oh, you worked at, or or you've been involved in this organization. I know somebody there, and they're going to go ask, right? And your goodwill chip is in that room that you're not in, right? I think that, a pretty popular word now is, building sponsors, a way to phrase it these days, and those who will stand and stand up for you and promote you without you being around. And so that's, I think, the best way to get the goodwill, or not goodwill, to get EQ out there on your behalf without the opportunity to actually display it over time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. That's great guidance. I just did a final call for any last questions, but I actually have a question to wrap us up. So I think you touched on it earlier. I think just during this time of transition, this time of high emotional IQ or emotional IQ, just any advice or any way that tools you've given your team on how to really manage relationships and manage just a lot of different pivotal moments that are all happening at once right now. Of myself, I'm in some leadership role, dealing with all my coworkers from afar and trying to manage different relationships while managing my own emotional stability. So any guidance or tools for the group about how to manage it all?
Yeah, that's
Loaded.
no problem.
You got it, right?
So I don't know if any of this is actually working, right? But focus on others, show you care, try to do and express, again, that you have empathy and you're trying to relate or at least understand where other people are at. Some people are home with kids. Some people are not. Some people have young kids and they are going out of their mind because they're trying to work and take care of their kids at the same time. Some people are really stressed out because there's no school for the kids to go back to. Some are doing fine. Some people are really anxious because COVID's out there, like really anxious. Some are not. So trying to focus on the way and appreciating the fact that we're all different, we all have different perspectives, embodying that. And when talking to people, focusing on that, acknowledging that, and continuing to do everything you can to express and show you care, whether that's having conversations about it, trying to elicit feedback from people. One of the things I've been doing, not entirely successfully, is trying to ask people to take some time off. I have found that we more so brought home to work rather than work home with everything going on. And it feels like all I do is just take breaks to be with my family rather than, right, go to work. And everybody seems to be working just a little more and finding it harder to disconnect. So people are getting stressed, right? They're getting overworked, and continue to try getting people to take a step back, to get away from that. Again, for me, it's meditation, it's going for a walk. It's literally, please take a day off, right? I will cover you, you cover me, right? Doing things to show and express care. Again, how that works is up to the audience, right? At the end, somebody's going to say, I'm going to tell somebody I got to speak to this fantastic organization and the members and the board, and they're going to say, so how'd it go, right? I'm going to say, I don't know, you'd have to ask them, right? Right? It's up to the audience, right? I can do the best I can. I can control the things I can control, but it's ultimately up to them. But what I can control is try to understand, to empathize, to appreciate, and do the things that I think somebody in certain circumstances would want and need under the environments, to ask questions, try to elicit the feedback, and do things to respond positively to it. Everybody's in, somebody on my team made a comment, we're all, everybody keeps saying we're all in the same boat. Says we're not all in the same boat. We may all be in the same storm, but we're in different boats, right? Maybe some similar, but like I said at the beginning, we all have different circumstances we're living through, different challenges we're dealing with, different environments that we have to respond to, and trying to understand that for different people and how it impacts your team as a whole as well as the individuals, I think goes a long way into hopefully having a positive impact on your team and those around you. I hope, because if it doesn't, that's not working for me. But if it does, maybe it is working for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what you said about the storm and the different boats, I think if anything, this time we're getting to know each other on a different level. Really just filters back to our EQ. So I know we're at time, but any parting words from you, Shaka, or if anyone else wants to hop in, we can do one last check-in.
The audio trailed off, but I think you said any final comments, right?
Yes.
Okay. This is going to sound a tad hokey, but embodying EQ is recognizing and appreciating we're all human. We all have things that motivate us. I think aside from money, finding those things for yourself is important. Build relationships. It's just a more enjoyable way to live. It's want people to want to be around you. Do things that you think can have a positive impact on your work and the people and the organizations you work in. We all have an equal right to opportunity, and this is not life, and work is not a zero-sum game. And so if you treat, some treat things as a zero-sum game, and they throw EQ out the window because they just want to win in the moment. It is not a zero-sum game. and you can take time to focus on others, and try to do what's best for the whole and not just yourself.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
And somehow that's going to end up helping you do better for yourself.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Awesome. Well, if there's nothing else from anyone, I would just like to say thank you again, Shaka, and everyone that joined this evening. Couldn't do it without any of you. If you have any questions regarding Why San Diego, myself, Emma, you name it, the board is all here for your support. We do have a couple upcoming events that we'll be sure to share, but overall, thank you so much, Shaka, again. And we look forward to seeing all of you, including Shaka, again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great evening.